everyone. I hope you're doing well. One of my goals I made this year was to watch all of the Bond films, starting with Dr. No and going up until No Time to Die. And I have one more Roger Moore film to watch. I believe it's A View to a Kill, but when I watched Moonraker, someone mentioned that it was kind of the 007 series response to Star Wars, and I was like, guess what? I have a Star Wars podcast, and nothing would make me happier than to make my friend Brian make him watch Moonraker. So how are you doing today, Brian?
Absolutely. I'm doing great. Watching all of the James Bond films is a noble goal to have for a year because there's a lot of them. I don't even know how many, like 28, 27. I don't know. There's a bunch, and yeah, you are making it through the Roger Moore ones. There were a lot of Roger Moore James Bonds, and yeah, when you told me that you'd watch Moonraker, we were talking a little bit about it kind of over in Discord chats about Moonraker and how it kind of turned into this thing. It was based on the book, but the book is way different, and then it took on kind of some Star Wars inspirations. So, Inspired a Galaxy seemed like a good fit to chat about this very divisive entry in the James Bond franchise.
Yeah. Sometimes one galaxy inspires another galaxy,
Absolutely.
Space, the final frontier. So my first Bond film I saw in theaters was Quantum of Solace. Did you grow up with the Bond films?
Yeah, so James Bond was something that I grew up with pretty much. Like, I was never like a diehard James Bond fan, but it was something that definitely we'd watch. James Bond always seemed to be like on, I think like TBS was the station, so we'd watch those like Sunday matinees. Like my dad and I would watch James Bond, and it wasn't really ever in any kind of particular order. It was just whatever way they kind of were coming out. And then about the time I was getting into like middle school and into high school, that was when Pierce Brosnan's James Bond was coming back. So GoldenEye was like this huge film, and the video game obviously. So I've been kind of more into James Bond, I guess, since then. But yeah, I grew up watching them with my dad on Sunday matinees. So it's always been, kind of a part of my life, at least peripherally, just spending time with him, watching those movies. And that was who I watched Moonraker with. They were in town visiting, so it was like going back to my childhood, watching one of the old ones with my dad.
Aw. Yeah, like I grew up aware of James Bond, but I didn't really watch the Pierce Brosnan ones, but I was always aware like that was the best Nintendo 64 game was GoldenEye, and like all of the James Bond games they had. But yeah, Quantum of Solace was my way in, and then I ended up watching all of the Daniel Craig ones, and I kind of got into all things Bond, and I was like, you know what, I'm gonna get some of this 007 perfume, some car swag, and I decided to just watch them all. And I mean, there's lots of Star Wars films, like 11 or 12, depending on like if you include like the Clone Wars movie that came out in theaters,
Right.
But I think there's like 25 official Bond films, and then like there's even a couple unofficial ones, and so yeah, it's a little bit of a hefty goal, so I'm glad that we can incorporate it into this podcast, though.
Yeah, absolutely. It is a hefty goal, and like you said, anytime you have kind of these big, long-running franchises, like James Bond, like Star Wars, obviously they're going to kind of influence one another and kind of the direction that they're going, and the way they're telling the story. Because we're talking a little bit more specifically about Moonraker, which came out in 1979, but Star Wars had just been out in 1977 and kind of changed the landscape for what movies were expected to do then, right? So you had, kind of your action adventure films. I think, Moonraker, I think was like the 11th James Bond movie, something like that.
Yeah.
But the way that movies worked and the movie going public, completely changed in 1977, and there were a lot of, kind of, I don't want to say knee jerk reactions, but a lot of movie studios and movie makers, trying to cash in and kind of ride that Star Wars wave, and definitely can see some of that here in Moonraker.
Yeah, and I was joking, about math earlier, and I was like 007 plus Star Wars equals Moonraker because we both love math so much. So,
That's right. Yeah, love some math for sure. But yeah, it definitely it does. 007 and Star Wars does equal Moonraker. So we're not gonna like trudge through the whole of Moonraker. That's going to be for everyone at home listening to go out and search that out. I think it's available on HBO if you want to fire it up and watch it. But yeah, there's definitely some parallels in there because Moonraker was the story. It was it was the one of the original books from James Bond, but the movie telling of the story is very different and very much inspired by this, space opera that we'd just gotten from George Lucas.
I think it included like a few character names in the title, and that's basically, like what they took from the book. So, but I hear like the reception for the book was fans seem to like it, and they're like, oh, they didn't quite make it into a movie, but sometimes that's not how it works out. But what I was impressed with is like Moonraker's production cost. It was like 34 million US dollars,
Mm-hmm.
which was like more than twice as much as the preceding film, The Spy Who Loved Me, that came out in 1977. And I think they were still paying off what they spent on Moonraker until like some of the Timothy Dalton films, but I think it does look, really good, and it was actually nominated. Moonraker was nominated for Best Visual Effects at the Oscars. So, and it was also like until GoldenEye, it was the like most successful Bond film. So they did spend a lot of money, but they did make a lot of money.
Yeah, absolutely. They did spend a lot of money, and it does look pretty good. I mean, obviously, it got the nomination there for the Oscar, but you get a lot of kind of travel locales. If you're familiar with the James Bond series at all, that he's always going, kind of globe trotting to these different exotic destinations. So in this one, we're in England, obviously. Spent some time in Italy, down to Brazil, and then obviously the space stuff, and that's where kind of these visual effects come in because kind of the plot of the story is they steal the space shuttle, which is on its way from the USA to England, I guess, for some sort of I don't know, like museum or science exhibit, some kind of thing. They steal the space shuttle, and it turns into this laser blast festival. But yeah, the stuff in this movie, it looked really good. Obviously, with Star Wars kind of paving the way, Industrial Light and Magic, on what could be done, to that scale and things like that. So you had stuff like this, like Moonraker, stuff like Star Trek. We're kind of capturing and using those ideas and techniques that Lucasfilm had developed to tell its story. So yeah, it looks really great. The space station sections, I think.
Yeah, I think like it was like the largest set ever built for a Bond film, that final like space station, and it looks really good. They achieved some really cool effects, like where they kind of had artificial gravity, and then like for some of the parts they were floating. So it
Mm-hmm.
does look nice. So
Yeah, absolutely. We're talking kind of about Moonraker, but just more generally, James Bond and Star Wars. So James Bond has always been filmed at Pinewood Studios, and they actually kind of set aside a specific stage for James Bond. It was originally made in 1976, and it's been through a couple of iterations. There was a fire, I think, at one point, so they had to rebuild it and then rebuild it again. But Star Wars actually, since the Disney acquisition, have been using Pinewood Studios as well. Disney has a contract with Pinewood, so now you have all of the James Bond films and all of the Star Wars films and productions being filmed in the same location.
yeah, that's why we got the Daniel Craig as a stormtrooper cameo in The Force Awakens, and he's the one that Ray tries mind trick on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. But yeah, so that's just kind of a neat, kind of crossover there, on the behind the scenes stuff. But some other, one of the other behind the scenes things that I thought was really interesting is basically they, they finished The Spy Who Loved Me with Roger Moore, and then kind of next up on the docket was For Your Eyes Only, but they decided to push that one back and bring Moonraker in because really wanted to get into space and see how much money they could have, and ultimately ended up paying off for him because, as you mentioned, Cassia, becoming the highest grossing Bond film until GoldenEye, almost 2 decades later, almost. So
yeah, it paid off monetarily. Like, it was kind of a mixed critical reaction, but I don't know. Do you think James Bond should go to space, or do you think he should stay on Earth?
I think if James Bond wants to go to space, then James Bond could go to space, I guess. I I don't know. I like my characters a wee bit more grounded, but especially kind of through this period of James Bond, the Roger Moore James Bond, they were very much more fantastical. But it reminds me of a quote from Ben Affleck, and I'm kind of paraphrasing this here, but when he was on set for Armageddon, he asked the director, wouldn't it have been easier to teach astronauts how to drill this meteor than teach, miners to become astronauts? But yeah, maybe James Bond, that's in his skill set. I guess James Bond has a license to kill and a license, maybe it translates license to kill in space and on Earth, both, I guess.
Yeah, like, he's probably a very good scientist as well.
What about you? Do you think that James Bond should go to space?
Oh,
can he go to
okay.
space?
I
guess he can.
I don't know.
He did, but
I kind of think, like, I never want to say never again, but
oh,
but I kind of think it makes a little more sense, like, if you're gonna save the world, like, stick to the world, like, the gravity of the world,
mm-hmm.
But who knows, maybe in some future James Bond movie they'll go to space again, or like in Mission Impossible they'll go to space, and like they'll blow our minds and we'll be like, why did we ever doubt that they could go to space,
That's true. Well, I believe that Tom Cruise could go to space. I don't know about Roger Moore specifically, but
yeah. So, did you like the opening theme, Moonraker?
The Moonraker theme is pretty good. It's not one of my favorites, but I think that it does a good job, and I kind of like the animation kind of sequence through there where it kind of looks more like extraterrestrial, kind of the way that they're doing that, is kind of that classic James Bond where it's like the cutout like images and things and different color palettes. So yeah, I think that the kind of intro theme works here for this one. But what about you? What are either some of your favorites, or what do you think about Moonraker here?
So Moonraker isn't my favorite Shirley Bassey theme. Like, I still think her best work, like, this might be sacrilege, but I prefer Diamonds Are Forever to her Goldfinger. Okay. I also like The World Is Not Enough, Live and Let Die. We Have All the Time in the World. And GoldenEye. Those are some of my favorite songs, I guess. But Moonraker, like, it's really hard to make a catchy pop or love song, like, called Moonraker, but they tried, and we have to give them props for that. So
that's right. Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. The James Bond theme is, kind of as a pivotal point of James Bond movies as anything else within the James Bond movie, right? You think about what kind of cool car is he going to have, what kind of cool gadgets is James going to have, and what is the opening title sequence and theme going to be. So
I mean, like, in Star Wars there's always like the opening crawl, like for James Bond films it's like the opening song and titles, so it's pretty fun. They kind of have like an opening action scene and then kind of get you into the music with the credits and then kind of like the main gist of the film. A lot of James Bond films, like, there's usually like a boat or a submarine or something gets hijacked, but in Moonraker it's the space shuttle is hijacked midair,
Midair, it just detaches itself. it is flying off to safety, and James Bond is in a very separate plane with very separate people, but gets thrown out of it and has to scrap his way to a parachute to his own safety, and then gets the movie started there. So really sets the tone for what you're going to be getting here. You know that this is going to be some sort of over the top nonsensory that's about to come your way, and that is exactly what it is.
Yeah, and the outside of England, like the first locale the movie treks to is Venice. And what are some highlights you had from Venice?
Venice is a really neat place. It is a really fun place to film in and things like that. And kind of when I'm watching through this section, I get a ton of Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade vibes. That was one of my Star Wars and James Bond parallels here, because I guess Steven Spielberg is a huge 007 fan. So when it came time to have Indiana Jones and the Last Crusade, we're gonna hire Sean Connery to be Indiana Jones's father. We're going to go to Venice and have this big crazy chase through the canals, just like we have in Moonraker here. And it's just very fun. There's like a glass museum they go to. They point out all the expensive things that are about to get broken. Venice
And they break them.
They break them. It's a lovely place, and it's fun. It's always fun to see kind of chases on the canal and stuff, because Venice is such just an interesting place in Europe and in the world. So
Yeah, it's beautiful. And it's funny because I'm like, oh, there's the St. Mark's clock tower. I hope they don't break it. And it's like, oh, they break it. Like not really, but like just in the movie. But it's a beautiful clock tower. And I'm surprised you didn't mention the pigeon doing a double take.
The crazy pigeon double take. Actually, that's another Star Wars parallel right there, because you have the same kind of thing with that Tusken Raider, right, where they kind of rock that frame back and forth. If you've watched ever any of the behind the scenes Star Wars stuff, how they got that, when he's attacking Luke there. Same kind of thing with this pigeon. It's not as smooth, I will say, as the Tusken Raider rock back and forth, but the pigeon's pretty good. There are a lot of pigeons in Venice, I can attest, so I guess that makes sense. But yeah, very fun section.
Yeah. I've seen some fan edits that fix the pigeon double take, and I'm like, good job, you guys. Then they kind of find, like, in Venice, like, there's the nerve gas that Drax is going to release on the world, and then they're like, we're going to go to Rio de Janeiro. And Holly Goodhead, that's an Ian Fleming-esque name, if I've ever heard one,
That's right, yeah.
She's
absolutely.
a character in this, so... And
she is a character in this. She is a doctor, I believe. Which is good. She's gonna be very pivotal to help James kind of get the problem with the all the space stuff sorted out later. But heads to Rio de Janeiro to go there, I guess, to find out what else Drax has going on. There's always the very fun scene there with Jaws and the cable car going up the mountain. That's always pretty fun, because Jaws was a really good villain, and he has a really good kind of villain end in the story, I think, Cassia.
Yeah, it's kind of more like living atonement rather than like death. He finds love, and he decides he wants to. Eventually, he decides like he's not gonna just be a henchman. He's gonna, use the Force, and choose a different path.
That's right. He chooses the path of love. He finds some love there in Brazil. Maybe Brazil is a place for lovers. I've never been to Brazil myself, but it looks really nice. There as they're kind of hanging out, and like we're seeing Carnival, and there's that mountain that they're going to, I think, is Sugarloaf Mountain. I don't remember if that's what they call it in the movie, but
it definitely is Sugarloaf Mountain. It's kind of funny because a lot of the places we see in this movie like are really far apart from each other, but like in the movie it just makes it seem like it's like 10 minutes away. But I'm like, you know what, it's a movie where literally James Bond goes to space, so like maybe we don't need to like plot ding it every 5 seconds. But Yeah,
That's right.
the
Yeah.
the carnival parts did remind me of Black Orpheus, if you've ever seen that. But
Oh,
um,
okay. No, I'm not. I'm not familiar with that, but yeah, Carnival looks like a crazy, insane time. I don't. Not for me. I'm not that big on crowds and stuff, but it definitely looks fun and colorful and vibrant here. So
yeah, eventually, James Bond goes to a pyramid. It's Drax's pyramid, and it kind of, I think it's supposed to be a Mayan pyramid, which I was kind of like, oh, it reminds me of Yavin 4. Did you kind of have that same reaction?
yeah, definitely. Kind of traveling along the Amazon there. Get to that because I think Yavin is modeled kind of after was it Guatemala? I think right.
Mm-hmm.
Yavin is so definitely kind of that the Mayan influence there. Um, within the kind of the architecture of those pyramids and stuff. So very much looks like, and we see Yavin 4 obviously, and Star Wars: A New Hope is that's where the Rebel Alliance is hiding. So yeah, kind of not too surprising, I guess, that maybe we'd see something kind of similar, and telling this story before we head off to space to our final space battle, just like in that Star Wars movie.
Little old Star Wars. What did you think of Drax the villain?
I thought Drax the villain was pretty good. So he's played by Michael Lonsdale, who is an excellent actor. He's been in things for forever, basically. So you've probably seen him in a bunch of stuff, including this. But yeah, Drax is a really good one. Kind of a classic James Bond villain. Just kind of wealthy and able to spend money to do do all of the evil things around the world that he wants to do to end the world or to end people or whatever. But yeah, I think Drax is interesting, and certainly Michael Lonsdale is an excellent actor. So kind of brings some gravitas, I think, to the character a little bit more. Actually, I think that Drax is probably the most grounded thing, kind of within the movie. But I don't know. I mean, aside from the idea of having, your Moonraker space laser weapon, that's a little fantastical. But yeah, I like Hugo Drax as a villain here. What do you think about Mr. Drax and his plans to take over?
I guess it's good that you kind of point out like he's grounded, like he's not like a maniacal laughter kind of villain, but at some points I was kind of like, is he just kind of like low energy because he's like when he's describing like he's gonna like kill the population of the earth using nerve gas, like it was kind of like to me he was reading a grocery list. Like it was a little like, okay, and you're gonna repopulate, like the world with like perfect people for a new master race. Like, and it was like, oh, that's not good. But I just thought it was a little low energy when he was saying that. But
Yeah.
maybe if it's, maybe I would be like, well, actually, when he was explaining his evil plan, he was just a little too, animated when he was saying it. So
That's right.
basically,
Maybe
maybe I was never gonna be, into that, but
That's right. Well, I don't know if we're supposed to be into the James Bond villains really, but maybe Drax is a little bit spread thin. We were talking off air. Drax owns like most of California. He owns all these famous and fancy things. He has his own pyramid. He has his own space station. He's got a lot going on, and I really like kind of in one of the opening scenes there when James and the helicopter pilot, who I think it's another weird edit where I think she has like on a headset and then all of a sudden it's gone because I don't know, it was messing up her hair, I guess. I don't know. But they're talking and James asks her if, there's anything that Mr. Drax doesn't own. And she says something along the lines of, if he doesn't own it, he doesn't want it or something like that. And I thought that was kind of a neat kind of setup for who this Hugo Drax, kind of like I said, grounded, but kind of this eccentric billionaire who's able to to go to the moon and shoot space lasers back down to get rid of everyone he doesn't want around. So
James Bond did predict a lot of, future events unknowingly. But I would say Moonraker isn't just inspired by Star Wars. I would say, like, there was this shot that I was like, oh, they're kind of circling and, like, walking down this hallway in a spacesuit. And I'm like, that's kind of like 2001 A Space Odyssey.
Hmm.
And that's of course by Stanley Kubrick, who, did you know he never won an Oscar for Best Director?
I did know that, yeah. Um,
It's
which is
unfortunate.
which is unfortunate. But yeah, definitely there's a lot of Space Odyssey kind of vibes. I'd have to look and see if perhaps Space Odyssey was filmed at the Pinewood Studios as well, because a lot of it looks the same, and a lot of like the spacesuits and stuff look very similar to the way they did in 2001. So
Yeah. And then eventually things escalate, and we literally get to see space laser fights. What did you
yes,
think
we
of
do.
that?
The space laser fight is amazing. It is the peak of cinema. Everything has been downhill ever since then. No, not really. But I love the way the space lasers sound. They sound amazing. Star Wars has its pew pews. That's pretty good, but not as good as the Moonraker space lasers. It's incredible. And then yeah, they have this fight, and it's almost comical because they go outside and there's like literally like 100 people in spacesuits like flying around shooting these lasers at each other. It's great. It's absolutely ridiculous, but it's so much fun.
Yeah, I was kind of like, so this is what it's like. Okay. 007 in space, you know.
That's right.
Yeah. Maybe one day, if wars are ever fought in space, that's what it'll be like, and it's like, why did we ever mock it, but um
That's right. Absolutely. Yeah. The space station goes invisible, and you can see everyone fighting. It's great. Great stuff.
did you think that the part where James Bond has to destroy, I forget what he's destroying exactly, but is it like the nerve gas containers or something? But I was like, oh, they're destroying the Death Star. Did you see that parallel?
Yeah. I mean, it's kind of it's not necessarily beat for beat of the same kind of this trench run and things, but yeah, it's this big super weapon in space. So in theory it's kind of the same, right? So he blows it up to save the day, and ends up coming back down to earth in an escape pod with his doctor friend. So yeah, I think that there are definitely some parallels there to the Death Star, and I think you kind of have to have that, right? We mentioned the fact that Star Wars kind of set the tone for what a big kind of action adventure blockbuster movie was going to do, and to have the Death Star, which is kind of the pinnacle of um, you know kind of the exciting end. You're literally like blowing up a planet. Everyone else is kind of left scratching their head, saying, "Well, how are we going to have this kind of ultimate climax to our movie?" So yeah, same kind of thing, I think.
Yeah, and I was kind of like, wait, wouldn't the doctor be better at like piloting the space shuttle, or shooting the thing? But I guess he's a spy, so
He,
we shouldn't question it that much. But
we
yeah,
shouldn't question it. Yeah, that's right. We shouldn't question most things in James Bond for a long time. I don't think. Yeah, probably. Yeah, Doctor Goodhead would have been better, but maybe the escape pod it flies itself mostly. You're just kind
yeah,
of
and
keeping it going, I guess. So.
I guess the good news is James Bond and Holly Goodhead make it back to Earth, and so does Jaws and his girlfriend. I forget the girlfriend's name. Is it Dolly, isn't it? Jaws'
Dolly.
girlfriend is named
Oh,
Dolly.
Jaws' girlfriend. Yeah, Jaws' girlfriend is Dolly, played by Blanche Ravalik. Yeah, and she's great. And Jaws and her are able to find love in amongst the insanity of Hugo Drax. So
They'd probably have a really good how did you meet story, and it's like, well, like after a fight, I met him. We went to space for a first date, and then we escaped. So it's like, yeah, okay, just give up. Like you can't beat that. But I don't
that's
know.
right.
Like a lot of people, like I give Moonraker about 2 stars. Like I had
Mm-hmm.
fun watching it. It was of its time. It was responding to Star Wars, but I kind of had fun watching it. What was your overall impression of Moonraker?
Yeah, so it was fun going back and watching it again. When you asked me to watch it, and like I'd mentioned, my my parents were in town, so I was watching it again with my dad, which was fun. So it reminded me kind of those times growing up and watching those. And at the time I would have watched these, I would have been a kid, right? So it didn't really matter. I didn't have the jaded movie brain that I have now to be like, well, this is terrible. That doesn't make sense, right? It's just a fun time, and that's ultimately what James Bond was going for. Especially kind of in those. You have a couple that are a bit more grounded, and then Roger Moore, Timothy Dalton, Pierce Brosnan. They're just absolutely just like goofball adventure stories, right? And then now they're a little bit more grounded and darker and grittier and a little bit truer tales, I guess. These more recent Daniel Craig ones. But yeah, James Bond has always just been kind of this fantastical, caricature of what a special agent might be if you had a license to kill and arsenal of crazy gadget weapons. So yeah, to that end, I think that Moonraker is perfectly fine installment within this franchise that runs close to 30 films deep now at this point.
So I listened to everything you said, but like, did you actually just call yourself jaded? Because like, I think you're like the least jaded person I know. So
That's well, I try to overlook my jadedness from time to time, but you know what I mean. Like when you're watching things as a kid, right? Everything is fun, right? You're just watching a movie and you're watching it for fun. You're not really dissecting it, per se, or talking about it on a podcast or writing a review of it on Letterboxd. You're just kind of watching it and having some popcorn and having a good time, and that's kind of what it felt like going back and watching this again. And I think that there's James Bond is a franchise that just kind of thrives on that feeling for sure. You want to see what the cool BMW is going to look like, and you want to see what kind of crazy darts are going to be in his watch, and what locations he's going to go to, and Moonraker does all those things. So
yeah, I mean, I think like Roger Moore like does have some movies that I really love from his tenure as Bond, like especially like The Spy Who Loved Me. Like it also has like probably the best opening scene ever, I don't want to spoil it, so I won't say what it is in case you haven't seen it, but I think I'm not like a fan of like the overall campy, goofy tone, but like kind of like maybe after the Daniel Craig movies, like maybe we kind of had some dark chocolate there, like, and it was
mm-hmm,
nice and like
mm-hmm.
of the times, but like maybe the next iteration of 007, whatever that is, maybe it'll be more like milk chocolate, like a little bit more fun, like who knows? Like we literally don't know anything, but yeah.
That's right. Yeah, the Daniel Craig James Bond were like an 80% dark cacao chocolate, and the Roger Moore ones are more like a Snickers bar, right? So both delicious, but very different.
Yeah. So if you saw any parallels in Moonraker to Star Wars that we missed, or any other films, like let us know what we missed. Like, because it's funny because I was actually like Googling like what are some films that kind of like were a knee-jerk response to Star Wars, and like I'd
Mm.
never heard of them, and like maybe there's a reason I haven't heard of them because they were kind of just like trying to like be Star Wars when they weren't Star Wars, like
Mm-hmm.
it's good to be inspired by things, but like it's good to remember like what kind of story you're trying to tell, like uh there's all these different kind of stories, and it's good to be inspired, but like remember what makes your story unique, so
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. And yeah, there were a bunch of like I'd said, kind of these quote unquote knee jerk reactions to Star Wars, but at the end of the day, that's why something like James Bond can have the lasting legacy of it. Well, it can certainly draw on inspirations from Star Wars, and maybe even get into a little bit of that cash grab. It still kind of stayed true to what a James Bond film was, at least for the time there for the character, obviously. So always good to spread the wings and fly, but just don't fly too close to the Star Wars sun. I think that was the lesson learned there from James Bond and Moonraker. Cash in while you can, but don't go overboard with it because you might lose the plot a little bit.
Yeah. Any other thoughts, or should we close out this mission?
No, I just wanted to make note. I'd mentioned kind of that parallel I saw there with the Venice section. I do want to stay. I think that we might have mentioned it back in our Max Rebo episode with when Huni was on. But we both think that the Return of the Jedi has basically a James Bond opening, which would make a lot of sense because that was right in the heart of Indiana Jones and Steven Spielberg and that. So maybe if Moonraker stole from Star Wars, maybe Star Wars stole from 007 there on that one. So
Yeah. Pink Floyd would have done a really excellent, Return of the Jedi theme. It's sad that that never occurred, but
that's right, the dark side of Tatooine for sure.
all right. I guess what did they say to close out 007 movies? They don't really have like a thing set like May the Force be with you. Wait, I know what it is. James Bond will return.